Hello, BookTube. Recently, this channel hit 12.9K subscribers, and as usual, when we hit a milestone like that, I ask for questions to do a Q&A. And I got a ton of questions. I'm going to answer them now with my usual caveats. I'm going to break up all of the questions into 30-minute videos so that this doesn't go on forever. And I ported all of the questions over from the comments field where they originally appeared. So I may have skipped a question. I may have omitted something. If that's true, it's certainly not personal. Feel free to ask the next time. And the one extra little caveat here, I'm hoping it's not a big deal. You will definitely hear murmuring or humming in the background because there's an AC unit working. This is a hot day here in Boston. So let's just get started. See if we can do this in 3 or 4 videos. Oh God. We start off with CVBN457, who has a penchant for spamming the questions, asking multiple barrages of questions. We shall see. Steve, I tried reading The House of Seven Gables last year, and just couldn't get into it. You've given it very high praise. That praise, combined with reading a few of Hawthorne's short stories that I enjoyed very much, has me wanting to give Seven Gables another try. What is it that you love about the book? What makes it great? That's too long a question for a Q&A, but that tends to happen. Certainly I love the incredibly high pitch of its diction, the pitch of its tone. I would be hard-pressed to pick why I love it. I love it a whole lot more than I do The Scarlet Letter, for instance. I think it's much more effective a production in every way. Maybe read a few more short stories of Hawthorne. Maybe that's the way. Or maybe read another novel. Maybe read The Marble Fawn, I've also praised very much. Maybe give that a try. And then go back to The House of Seven Gables. Anastasia B. says, congratulations, Steve and Frida. My question is this. Why do you think Scott Snyder and Grant Morrison are paid to write Batman stories when both are just awful at it? I have no idea. I have no idea at all how either one of them gets work. Let's see here. I assume that they get work because they make work, because they're not going to let you down. And maybe they're fan favorites. Certainly Grant Morrison, that's the only thing that would excuse his continued work in the industry, is that he is somehow a fan favorite. Isaiah Armstrong says, hello, Steve and Bean. A few questions for you. What exactly is a book review supposed to do? What should a reader get out of one? You mentioned how it's not supposed to be the reviewer's thoughts, so I'm curious what exactly the purpose of a book review is. Well, that also is not really a Q&A question. I've been thinking quite a bit. I've made 2 videos on this channel on book reviewing, specifically. For those of you who are coming to the channel new, and obviously since 12.9, there are at least 100 of you who are coming to the channel new. I am a professional book reviewer, and that's why it's come up twice. But that's a long time ago. I've been thinking about making a 3rd one. But in answer to your question, we can give it a try here. A book review is supposed to be a thorough and thoroughly entertaining read of a book. Not necessarily as a substitute for your own reading of the book, but as a spectator sport for you to see what a thorough and entertaining read of the book is like. It should have the goal of either explicitly or implicitly tipping the balance for you as to whether or not you want to spend your time, your money, and most of all your attention on the same book, which is why it often helps if you read the same reviewer over and over again so you get a sense of what they're like. That's also why it's absolutely incumbent on the reviewer to supply the energetic part of energetic reading. They can't just give a book report, or they're useless to you. Let's see, you go on. How many friends from your traveling days still keep in touch? None. I didn't have any friends in my traveling days, except dogs, and they're all gone. And how did you become friends with Sam Sachs? How did he become a book reviewer? I became friends with Sam Sachs when he was working at the downtown Boston Barnes & Noble, which no longer exists. No Barnes & Noble exists in Boston anymore, but once upon a time, we had a ragged, down-at-heels, wonderful, cavernous, unlighted, old Barnes & Noble in downtown Crossing, right in the heart of downtown Boston. And I ran the information desk. And Sam was just a fresh-faced hire, just a kid. And he became a book reviewer in the same way that most people do, which is you do a little review, and then a bigger fish snaps that up, and you do a review for them, and then a bigger fish of them snaps that up, and you do something for them. And as long as you don't miss your deadlines and you continue to produce good work, that's usually a way that you'll get your foot in the door, and then your leg in the door, and then you'll be in the door. That's usually the way of it. Harrison Recht says, "Hi, Steve. I generally prefer nonfiction, but appreciate your fiction recommendations very much." Well, as well you should. Just wanted to know if you recommend either of these series, The Red Wheel by Solzhenitsyn and North and South by John James. The Red Wheel is an undertaking, and I believe the author loses his way quite often in the course of that undertaking. North and South is, of course, a drastically different thing in terms of quality and in terms of reach. Then neither one of them is particularly strong recommendations if you're looking for a long-haul series like that. I can certainly make others if you email me. CVBN457 is back. Steve, once again, I'd like to thank you for the Western Canon Starter Kit. It was my introduction to your channel. What an eye-opener. That was 2 years ago now. I've read most of the works on that list. It has been such a joy to see the storytelling thread pass through time, one work influencing another. Thanks for the education. Until we meet again, Spaminator out. Well, you're welcome. There was a pleasure to do. I keep putting off the sequel to the Western Canon Starter Kit, which is the Western Canon Continuing Kit, the Western Canon sophomore year. I keep meaning to do that, and I haven't done it yet. Heather Gregg, who has a BookTube channel, you should all go and subscribe. Steve, congrats on being a YouTube influencer even without fairy lights. Number 1, how are you planning to celebrate 13K subscribers? I don't think this channel will ever reach 13K subscribers. Number 2, for NaNoWriMo, how's about pulling together an ebook of your best book reviews, anecdotes over the years, scraping from your journals and thoughts on books and reading, and making it available to purchase in time for Christmas gifts? Well, NaNoWriMo is for fiction, and it's for new fiction. You're not supposed to polish anything new or anything old. You're supposed to create a new work of fiction and write the whole first draft of it in 1 month. So your, Steve's literary remains idea is a good one, but not for NaNoWriMo. However, I am assuming that your mention of NaNoWriMo in a Q&A to me means you are volunteering to do NaNoWriMo with me in November as a writing buddy. Great. Start plotting and then start researching so that when it comes time, on the stroke of midnight on the 1st of November, you can immediately start writing. We can compare notes. Oh, baby. It's hot. Even with the AC and the fan on, it's still hot. Baby, Frida has a marked weakness for the heat. Andrew Russell, hi Bean, and Steve, of course. A few questions, Steve. Does negative mood ever affect your reading pace? And if so, how do you overcome this? Why do you not track/record the works you have read, and would you see any value in doing so? Do you think you will ever entirely get rid of physical books from your library? And if not, why not? What sort of criteria do you use to determine whether or not to own a physical or an ebook? That's a lot of questions. The answer to the first one, I'm not really prone to moods. And if I'm feeling, a little bit of an ingrown toenail mood, the thing that usually lodges me out of it when it comes to reading is just to read more. Just plow through a book and then start another one. The books will usually do it. But you had lots of other questions, right? Why do I not track and record the things I read? I did for the longest time. I've kept reading journals over the years, on and off, many, many times. I never confer with them. I never consult them after I've done them. I write them and never look at it again. I tend to remember these things well enough so that I don't feel the need for an external log of any kind, at the moment anyway. Do you think you will ever entirely get rid of physical books from your library? No, no, certainly not, especially since just the other day I went to open the Nook app on my iPad, which had 2,500 books on it, and it refused to open. And it didn't say, take this step, that step, or the other step. It didn't say consult with a help desk or anything. It just refused to open. I turned the machine off and then turned it on again. I powered down the iPad completely, waited a bit, and then powered it up again. The Nook app refused to open. And I knew perfectly well what I would hear if I called the Barnes & Noble help desk. They would say, well, just delete the app and then re-download it. It must be stuck. So just delete it and re-download it. All of the books that you bought from Barnes & Noble will be re-downloaded right away. You won't lose anything except maybe 15 minutes of inconvenience. But of course, all 2,500 of the books on that app were sideloaded. And I knew that if I deleted the app, I would lose them all. And I did. I thought, I don't want to do that. I don't want to lose them all. And I thought, well, if the app won't open, you've lost them all already. And you don't want a useless piece of real estate on your iPad, so I did. With the touch of a button, I deleted 2,500 books. So I am not going all ebook anytime soon, no. And what sort of criterion do you use to determine whether or not to own a physical book? Usually, it used to be that if I really loved a book, I would have the print version and the ebook version. Now, if I can, I want both for everything. And also, thankfully, I learned this lesson before I lost that Nook app library. When you've got a file of an ebook sitting on your desktop, send it to every reading app that you have. They aren't all going to crash at the same time. Let's see here. CVBN457 is back. The Spaminator Part 3, the re-spamming. Steve, congratulations on 12.9K. You've mentioned that you enjoy a glass of wine from time to time. What is your favorite style of wine? I enjoy wine, but I'll admit all of the spam has weakened my palate, and I can't really tell the difference between a $5 wine from Walmart and a 500 bottle from, well, I have no idea where you would buy a $500 bottle of wine. Anyway, cheers. I do enjoy a glass of wine from time to time, but never alone. Not even one glass alone anymore. That was very much not true 20, 30 years ago. But now, I need company. I need conviviality. I need friends to be with me. Then I would happily drink a gallon of wine, but not on my own. And what I prefer is an ordinary dry red wine. Chateau Thames Embankment. That's all. Pomeroy is very, very ordinary. That's all I prefer is Chateau Thames Embankment. A $5 bottle of red wine is fine by me. Absolutely fine. And you know, wine snobs will always tell you that you really can't tell the difference, but I've had $500 bottles of wine, and I couldn't tell the difference. Now, wine snobs have a fire break beyond that. They will say, well, the reason why is because you've destroyed your palate. I don't believe that. I don't believe that at all. I may not have the experience of a professional wine taster, but I have at last recorded results from Mass General Hospital a sense of smell that's 5 to 6 times greater than a normal human. So I don't know how ruined my palate is. I don't see that much of a difference. For me, I always think of the great line from The West Wing. C.J. Craig is being twitted by some functionary about the expensive wines at a dinner, and she says, "It's wine. You drink it." It's just so give me a $5 bottle of wine anytime, as long as I also have company, which I'm not going to have this week because it's going to be boiling hot until further notice. Michael Backy says, Hi Steve, it was a delight to see your reaction when you opened the package containing the Penguin Classics Marvel collection. Thanks to you, I own them too, and I'm looking into other comic anthologies to broaden my reading experience. What other anthologies, comic or otherwise, would you like to see made? And to throw in my Joker card, would you have the same reaction if the package contained an anthology of Mad Magazine? Well, I wouldn't have the same reaction because I don't have the same relationship with Mad Magazine. I love Marvel Comics and DC Comics. I would like to see, obviously, since we had the Black Panther, Captain America, and Spider-Man, I would love to see Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman. And I would like it if I could pick the issues. That would be absolutely great. As opposed to, I mean, there have been many, many anthologies of those three characters over the years. And I wouldn't want any of the editorial crew at DC Comics to pick issues themselves in 2022. Because I know what I would be getting. I'd be getting blue checkmark, woke scold Twitter nonsense instead of canonical great stories. But if I could pick them myself, that would be awesome. I know for the Superman volume, of course, you would want the whole of the story called For the Man Who Has Everything by Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons. You'd want the whole of that, and that was the Superman annual, so that's quite a few pages, but you'd still have room left over for Superman's first appearance in Action Comics #1, and a few other things. Action Comics number 500, for instance, or number 300. I'd like to do the picking, but I'd like to see those, of course. Let's see here. Paul Marin, but not the real Paul Marin. Hello, Steve and Frida. Since you're a friend to all dogs, any advice on how to handle a flea infestation indoors? What flea/tick preventative does Miss Frida use? Frida doesn't use any flea or tick preventative, and none of my dogs ever have. Fleas and ticks will die instantly if they are subjected to an almost instantaneous, a pico burst of intense electricity. But another thing that I am Frida's tick prevention. because my hands run over every inch of her little body every single day, many times. It is not possible for a tick to gain any purchase on her and me not know about it, and then I just remove them. And fleas, well, Frida has dense, tightly curly hair, and that makes it harder for fleas. And also, we have a bath regularly. She's easy to bathe, so we have a bath regularly. And that tends to do it. If you have an infestation in your home of fleas or ticks, then you need to call in a professional. There's nothing you can give your dog that's going to fix that, because the things are living and propagating off your dog somewhere else. You need to bring in a professional to take care of that, or it's never going to go away. Let's see here. CVBN457 here again. Steve, last year I read Anna Karenina. There were several parts that moved me to tears. Yes, even the Spaminator has a heart. Has any book ever made you cry? What was it? No book has ever made me cry. No. Robert White says, got a question for tech guy Steve. That for those of you who are new to the channel, I have a weakness, a distinct soft spot for tech. New and old. I actually love it. And have thought many times about making a separate channel, except I spend a lot of time on this channel. It doesn't seem like I'd have the extra time for another channel, but I've thought about making a tech channel, and what fun that would be. For the most tech-illiterate person on YouTube to have a tech channel, what fun that would be. But anyway, what is your question? I was real close to pulling the trigger on a tablet last week's Prime Day sale, but I didn't. You've got many. What's your ideal screen size / display for 2022? Well, that's going to vary from person to person, right? Like, for instance, for a flat screen, I do a huge amount of reading. I don't really use my tablets for anything else but reading, or reading documents that I'm using for BookTube. In other words, the primary use of these things, which is videos, either to watch or to play, I don't do at all. And so I am rather enamored of the 6 or 7 inch size, the size that's one hand, size that fits, the size that doesn't have a whole lot of mass behind it, so if it falls or if something falls on it, it's much more likely to survive. It's much more likely to be unscathed. For me, this is just the ideal size. I don't know why. I had an iPad mini. This is an iPad mini. I had an iPad mini first generation that was too weak. It was a really good machine, but it was just too weak. It had to be right on top of the Wi-Fi in order to detect it. And one of you sent me an iPad mini 4. This is a 4th generation iPad mini. It serves every need that I have. The only drawback is that it's 16 gigs of storage. And with an iPad, you can't add storage unless you move things to the cloud, which you absolutely shouldn't do. So, I'm right away going to be butting my head on the ceiling of the storage for a 16 gig machine. And it's got me tempted to buy an iPad mini with 64 gigs of storage, something like that, so that I don't ever have to worry about the storage. But that's for me, and that's because I'm mostly reading. Which is why, I'm almost at 16 gigs for this thing, and I'm not worried about it. And the reason why I'm not worried about it, instead of it being an emergency, is because I mostly read. The amount of space I have left on the storage will take me a while to fill with just books. So it would depend entirely on what you use it for. Let's see here. Ranch Elder says, hi Steve, how did you feel about the discovery of the Endurance earlier this year? I had just read Lansing's Endurance prior to the discovery, so it was a great joy to hear. Any other historical discoveries for which you hold out hope? I thought it was fascinating. I'm watching to see, all the details of it. And of course, when it comes to historical discoveries for which I hold out hope, there's one that's sort of been dangled in front of the reading community for a long time. I don't know how likely it is to happen, but of course, ancient libraries are what I'm hoping for. The ancient world was full of libraries, large libraries where some provincial administrator would go out to the far end of beyond in Gaul, Transalpine Gaul or whatever, and they would have a mansion, and maybe it belonged to a spice merchant or something or other, and they would try to make it a little bit of Rome. They would try to duplicate their villa back on the Janiculum. So they would build a library of books, thousands of them, and they would include staples that we don't have anymore. That Roman official might not have been all that much of a reader, but he would certainly have had all of Sophocles, all of Aeschylus, and we don't have that. He would have had all of Livy, might even have known Livy. And Those libraries have not turned up, and I would like it if some of them did. They can't all be gone. There's just no way. They can't all be gone. Even if, like, for instance, libraries in Pompeii or Herculaneum that would have been covered in scalding ash and pumice, but that might be readable. The actual spectrography of the ink in those now mineral blocks might be readable with the kind of technology that we have today, in which case you might be able to reconstitute what's in them. Stuff like that, I yearn for those discoveries. Let's see here. Minio Pietrino has a comment that's 2,000 words long. This is 2,000 words long. This is going to take me 10 minutes to read. Okay. The tales of your romp through Westerns were fun to listen to, and I thought it a shame you did not have the time to delineate the genre's characteristics as you had wished. You are the person to do it. I could still do it. Now, someone brought up Karl May during your previous Q&A, and I think he'd come in handy, especially since for most of us in Europe, his potboilers were the childhood adventure stories which brought us the closest we would ever get to reading a Western. But I would not say he wrote actual Westerns. Would you? And then you go on. This is like 1,000 more words. I was in primary school when I went through his novels, yet listening to you set forth your criteria for the genre, I kept ticking the boxes as well as I remembered them. We have post-Civil War border settings described in depth, detailed accounts of N.A., forest, prairie, desert, journeys, a penchant for horses, guns, and Wild West paraphernalia, a surfeit of Indians, and, while not fond of cowboys overmuch, May writes at length about hunters and trappers. That said, I can think of two aspects setting him apart. First, American manliness as the definitive trait for decision-making in Westerns seemed replaced by what I call a European Roman virility for the leads. Second, there is a Christian justice inflicted upon the villains who are never made larger than life. Please forgive my block of text. It is an email to me. It is of absolutely no interest to anyone watching a Q&A, and it takes 10 minutes to read. But he seems a good borderline case and wanted your thoughts on all of the above. Well, I'm obviously not going to be able to give my thoughts. I've just spent 10 minutes reading your dissertation. I think Karl May qualifies as a Western. But that's not satisfying to you as an answer any more than it's satisfying to me to give. We're just going to move on. There's only so much time to do these. Which is why every single time I call for questions, I ask for brevity. Oscar Mendoza, my partner and I have our own personal book event called Hot Girl Summer, where we read novels with female protagonists that we can't help fall in love with, such as Jane Eyre or the protagonists in Jane Austen's novels. Any recommendations from either classics or recent books? Lots, of course, lots. I'd recommend Housekeeping by Marilyn Robinson. I'd recommend Seventh Samurai by Helen DeWitt. Also, a novel that I don't think is in print anymore. I don't think it ever will be in print anymore. I recommend it all the time on this channel. It's called For the Love of Robert E. Lee. If the female protagonist there doesn't warm your heart, I don't know who will. Ravens fan 1961 says, "Hello, Steve. Thank you for your very entertaining videos. A couple of questions, please. How often do you visit the public library?" I keep meaning to put it back on my routine, some routine. It went off that routine when I shortened my outside activities when my previous two dogs were old and getting sick. Suddenly I recontoured my life so that I left them as seldom as possible. And then that's enough to destroy a habit right there. But then on top of that, COVID hit. And I haven't revived libraries, either the one that's right up the road from me, which is a branch of the Boston Public Library, or the Boston Public Library itself, the main building in Copley Square, which is gorgeous and one of my favorite places in the whole world. I just haven't done it. So right now, how often I visit the public library is never. But I want to change that. I'm obviously not going to change it this week, but I want to change it. And also, do you think publishers will still print new release physical books in 100 years? I doubt it. There won't be any forests. I doubt it very much. They shouldn't do it now, but I doubt it very much. Or if they did, they should do it in unbelievably limited quantities. Something to reflect the size of readership out in the world. Unbelievably limited quantities and very low prices. But let's see here. How are we doing for time? Oh, we're fine. Flora should be reading has a long block of questions. Congrats, Steve, moving inexorably towards 13K. My 3 questions. Number 1, what do you think of Paul Wesley as young Kirk? I saw that he was introduced in the last episode of Strange New Worlds, and he struck me as fairly affable. Fairly affable? Sure. Paul Wesley's too old, first of all, for the role. I know that seems heartless because he's a young guy, but he's too old for Jim Kirk, who, keep in mind, would be 6, 7, maybe 10 years before we meet him on Star Trek. So Paul Wesley's too old for that role. And I'm not 100% sure what the producers were going for with the way they did Kirk. I have a super secret sexy influencer Voxer group all about Strange New Worlds, and one of the people in that group mentioned that with a young Shatner and with the characterization of young Kirk, the idea is that you can't take your eyes off him. That he stands out as the giant figure that he will become. And he very much doesn't in that turn on Strange New Worlds. You don't care whether he comes back at all. You don't care anything about him at all. And I say I don't know what was in the showrunners' minds, but I think I do. I think I am developing a grand unified theory of Star Trek Strange New Worlds. And I think that it's designed to replace the original series. Not to complement it and not to be a prequel to it, but to replace it entirely. And if you want to do that, if that is your SJW blue checkmark role, if that's your goal down the line, no matter how friendly you made the first season, then you want Kirk to be forgettable because he's never going to be captain of the Enterprise. But we shall see. Number 2, what did you think of the John Adams miniseries with Paul Giamatti? I recently watched it and found it very compelling, but some of the directing was very confusing, those Dutch angles especially. I thought it was a mess. An absolute mess. For every one moment that was any good, there were 20 moments that were either outright bad or sickening. Like you mentioned, the Dutch angles, but it's not just the Dutch angles. The camera never quite stops sliding around. It's all very gradual, but it never stops. For no reason that I could determine. And Paul Giamatti is really bad. And is there a particular he's really talented, but he's terrible in that miniseries. And is there a particular reason why John Adams in the miniseries chain smokes? Is there a particular reason for that? And what on earth? Naturally, I'm going to be partial here. I'm going to be paying attention to any portrayal of Samuel Adams. And in this movie, the actor who plays Denethor in Lord of the Rings, the guy who's messy eating, he plays Sam Adams as a brutish, thuggish gang leader. What on earth? What on earth? That is just totally wrong. There were a couple of moments in it that worked, that appealed to me. The full, unbelievable horror of being tarred and feathered, for instance, or the weird, otherworldly quality of John Quincy Adams when he was young. But I thought it was mostly just a mess. And number 3, what do you think of Stephen Fry's mythology books and his book on how to write poetry? Curious to know your thoughts. I am in the same position here as a lot of people when it comes to the books of Stephen Fry. His later books, Heroes and Mythos and all. And that is, everyone who wants to assess his books has to start by acknowledging what everyone acknowledges, that he's a heck of a guy. He's tremendously fun to listen to, tremendously interesting, obviously tremendously erudite. That little clip of him talking with a Catholic priest about getting to heaven that went mega viral a couple of years ago did so deservedly. But his books are flyweight. These things are flyweight. And everyone all the bookish people I know who are asked, what do you think of Stephen Fry's books? They always get this awkward, squirming look on their face because it feels like you're drowning a kitten. I like Stephen Fry as an actor, as a character, as a presenter, seemingly as a person. His books are margarine. They're flyweight. There's nothing to them at all. And I don't know if that's because he figured that's all he needs to do. Certainly they've done well. Or maybe that's all he can do. And there's no crime in that either. It's just, I'm not going to just bounce up and down with enthusiasm about them. Here, let's stop. Let's stop here and move on to part 2.